You have some Google products you use, if I may ask.
No.
How do you survive?
Perfectly well. If there is an occasion where I feel the absolute need to use Google, I go through various layers of encryption and location reconfiguration before I go to Google search, just on principle.
There is a way to escape the omnipresent eyes of Google and Facebook. You can use a VPN and send all your data traffic through a secure server in another country. But big tech won't lose any sleep over individuals resisting the surveillance capitalists.
I don't want anyone to get confused that if you forego Google search, you are somehow, fighting the fight, because this is a collective problem and it requires collective action. That we didn't have many of these tools, and we were fine. We lived rich and full lives. We had close connections and friends and family. So having said that, I want to recognize that there's a lot that the digital brings to our lives. And we deserve to have all of that. But we deserve to have it without paying the price of surveillance capitalism. And right now, we are in that kind of classic Faustian bargain. 21st century citizens should not have to make the choice of either essentially, going analog or living in a world where our self-determination, our privacy are destroyed for the sake of this market logic. That is unacceptable. And let's also not be naive. You get the wrong people in charge of our government at any moment, and they look over their shoulders at the rich control possibilities offered by these new systems. And there will come a time when, even in the West, even in our democratic societies, our government will be tempted to annex these capabilities and use them over us and against us. Let's not be naive about that. When we decide to resist surveillance capitalism, right now, while it lives in the market dynamic, we are also preserving our democratic future and the kinds of checks and balances that we will need going forward in an information civilization if we are to preserve freedom and democracy for another generation.
The European Union already has legislation with which it regularly wraps American tech businesses over the knuckles. Google was fined several $billion because it had abused its monopoly position. In theory, European citizens are protected against data robbery by regulations for fair competition and by the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation.
And do you think that the EU data protection law is a step in a good direction, or is it sufficient?
We have privacy laws, and the GDPR is the furthest frontier of our privacy laws. And we have antitrust laws. The thing is that as important as these laws are, we still need more, because surveillance capitalism is unprecedented. And so we're going to need the laws and the regulatory regimes that respond directly to these new unprecedented operations. GDPR talks a lot about data ownership, data accessibility, and data portability. These are very important things if the only data that we're talking about is the data in the public operation, the data that we've given to the corporations. But as we have seen, most of the data that they use to feed into the factories, to produce the predictions, these are data that we haven't given. Or if we've given, we don't even know that we've given, because it came in our exclamation points. It came in our walk in the park and picking up the cadence of our voice and the timbre of our voice, all rich predictive signals. So no matter how much data ownership we claim, or accessibility or portability, most of the data is in the shadow operation. And the shadow operation is never coming to us. We will never get those data. They claim them as data that they own. They took it from our lives. They took it from our private experience without our permission. They analyzed the data. They made it into products. They sold the products and they took the profit. Illegitimate profit, because they took it at the beginning without asking, without our knowledge. Recall, bypassing our awareness.
Do the EU have a chance against the behemoth of surveillance capitalism?
These 20 years have been the honeymoon for surveillance capitalism, because they have been 20 years largely unimpeded by law. Unimpeded by law. Why? Well, the most important reason is that they're doing things that have never been done before, so there are no laws against it. Just like factories employing children, in a mass production factory. There hadn't been anything like that before, and there were no laws against it. And it took our societies a while to sort of wake up. We stood up against the extractive companies and their violence, the companies that came to be known as the Gilded Age, the companies where we turned around and we called their leaders robber barons. That's not what they were called at the time. At the time, they were worshipped as these, wealthy gods and geniuses who knew how to wield the might of machines and capital. If we had been trying to stop it, to curtail it, to outlaw it for every one of these 20 years, and we had utterly failed, then I might, put my chin in my hand and say, gosh, I'm starting to feel like things might be really bad. But that's not the case. We haven't even tried yet to stop it. Look, surveillance capitalism is 20 years old. Democracy is several centuries old. I bet on democracy.